My name is Miles Werner. I'm 32 years old, and I've been to exactly one wedding in my life, my own. I left before the cake was cut. I remember the weight of the room. 500 people. White tablecloths as far as I could see. The band playing something soft in the corner. My dad was standing 10 feet away from me in a rented suit he'd pressed himself that morning. And then I heard 3 words, spoken into a live microphone, in front of every person who mattered to my family, and something in me went very still. Not angry, still. That stillness is what I want to tell you about. Because what I did next cost me the future I thought I was building, and what happened after that gave me something I never knew I'd lost. Before we go any further, if this is your first time here, please take a second to like and subscribe. Drop your city and local time in the comments. I read every single one. Now let me take you back to October 14th. The morning of the day I almost made the worst mistake of my life. I grew up in a house on Fernwood Drive in Dayton, Ohio. Nothing special about it from the outside. Single-story ranch, dark green shutters, a front lawn my dad kept short enough that the neighbors never had anything to say about it. The kitchen smelled like coffee from about 5 in the morning until noon because Howard Werner was a man who started his day before the rest of the world woke up. My dad was not a big talker. He wore flannel most of the year, drove a 2009 Honda Accord that had a small dent in the rear bumper he never bothered fixing, and he read an actual physical newspaper every morning at the kitchen table. Not on his phone. Paper. He had a routine, and he kept it the way some men keep their word. Quietly, consistently, without needing anyone to notice. We weren't poor. We weren't rich either. The bills got paid. I went to good schools. When I needed something, it was there. When I wanted something unreasonable, my dad would look at me over the top of his paper and say nothing, which was its own kind of answer. There was one moment I've thought about a lot since everything happened. I was maybe 17. Someone had invited my dad to a business conference downtown, some industry event, nice hotel, the kind of thing men in suits went to feel important. He looked at the invitation, set it on the counter, and said, "I don't go to those things anymore, son." And that was it. No explanation. I didn't ask. There was also a corner in the garage, a gray filing cabinet, always locked. I noticed it 100 times growing up. I never once saw him open it. He was the most private man I've ever known. I used to think that was just who he was. I was wrong. I met Claire Calloway at an architecture workshop in Columbus in the fall of 3 years ago. She was sharp, asked questions nobody else thought to ask, laughed at the right moments, had this way of cutting through whatever was complicated and finding the simple thing underneath. I liked her immediately. I liked her for months before I told her. We dated for 6 months before I brought her home to Dayton. That went fine. My mom made her feel welcome. My dad shook her hand and asked her 2 questions about her work, then went back to his paper. Claire told me later she thought he was reserved. I told her that was just him. Then she brought me home. Her family lived in Dublin, Ohio, east side of Columbus, the kind of neighborhood where every house had a 3-car garage and a landscaping crew that came on Thursdays. Gerald Calloway did commercial real estate. Patricia ran the household, and from what I could see, most of Gerald's social calendar. The first time Claire's mom met my dad was at a dinner I'd rather forget. He pulled up in the Accord. Claire's eyes went to the car for just a second. Not a long look, nothing she'd ever admit to. And then she smiled at me. I filed that away and kept walking. 18 months after we started dating, I proposed. We planned the wedding for the following spring. Somewhere in that time, I turned down a senior project manager position in Portland. Better money, bigger scope, the kind of job I'd been working toward. I stayed because Claire was in Columbus, and I didn't want to ask her to choose. She never asked me to stay, but she didn't tell me to go either. I told myself it was a choice. I didn't see yet that it was a test. The Calloway house was the kind of place that announced itself. High ceilings, framed photographs arranged on the wall in a way that looked casual but clearly wasn't. A kitchen island large enough to park a car on. Patricia had set the table with actual candles for what was supposed to be a casual Tuesday dinner. I noticed that immediately. Casual dinners don't need candles. Patricia Calloway started asking questions before the bread came out. What firm did I work for? How long had I been there? What was the growth path? She wasn't unfriendly about it. Her voice stayed warm, her smile stayed in place. But the questions had a shape to them, like a form you fill out to see whether you qualify for something. Gerald mostly talked about wine. He had opinions about what they were drinking. He showed me the label. He did not ask me anything about myself. About 20 minutes in, Patricia turned the conversation to family. She asked about my parents. I told her my mom worked part-time at a dental office. Then she asked about my dad. I said he was retired. Retired from what? She asked. He had a business, I said. A small pause. She picked up her wine glass. I see, she said. 2 words, perfectly polite, and every person at that table understood exactly what she meant. Derek, Claire's older brother, 38, broad shoulders and a salesman's handshake, caught my eye and smiled a little, the way people smile when they want you to know they're in on something you're not. Claire changed the subject. She mentioned a restaurant she'd been to recently. The conversation moved on. I let it move on. That was my first mistake. It didn't stop after that dinner. Over the 6 months that followed, Patricia had a talent for landing small cuts in public. At a birthday party for one of Claire's friends, she introduced my parents to someone she knew. And these are Miles's parents, Howard and Donna, very salt-of-the-earth people. She said it like a compliment. It wasn't. Gerald was worse in a different way. He didn't bother with the packaging. At a barbecue at their place in late summer, a group of men stood around the grill talking business, and I heard him say, loud enough that it was meant to carry, "Claire's always been independent. She picked a good worker. Not exactly what we'd hoped for, but..." He let the sentence die there. The men around him nodded. I didn't say anything that afternoon, but that night I sat down with Claire, and I said it plainly. If your family keeps talking about my father the way they do, I need to know you'll say something. Not for me, for him. She looked at me across the kitchen table, and her expression was careful. Not defensive, not dismissive. Careful, the way you look when you already know the answer, but you're not ready to say it. I'll handle it, she said. I want to be clear about something. I didn't stay because I was a pushover. I stayed because I'd watched my dad spend 30 years not asking for anything from anyone, and the least I could do was try to build something with the woman I loved before I decided it couldn't work. I gave that effort its fair shot. But I'd put a line in my head. I hadn't said it out loud yet. I should have. The bridal shower was about 30 people. A Saturday afternoon at the Calloway house. Catered food, flowers on every surface, the whole thing. My parents came because they were family, because that's what family does. My dad wore a sport coat and slacks. He'd shined his shoes. He stood next to my mom near the edge of the room and watched everything with the same expression he used to have watching the evening news. Patient, taking it in, not bothered. Patricia found him within the first 10 minutes. "Howard," she said, loud enough for the cluster of women nearby to hear. "Do you need a ride home later? We can arrange something." She said it with a full smile, the kind that comes with its own explanation built in. She was being helpful. She was being thoughtful. Wasn't she being generous? My dad looked at her for a moment. "I'm fine, Patricia," he said. "Thank you for the concern." That was all. No edge in his voice, no change in his face. He didn't explain that he'd driven himself. He didn't mention the car. He just answered and let the silence after his answer do whatever it was going to do. Patricia blinked once and turned away. I could see, even from across the room, that his calm had irritated her more than an argument would have. Later, near the end of the afternoon, I noticed a man I didn't recognize. 50s, well-dressed, one of Gerald's business contacts, looking at my dad from across the room. Not a hostile look, more like someone trying to place a face they'd seen before. He took out his phone, seemed to think better of it, put it away. On the drive home, I asked my dad if it got to him. What Patricia did. "They don't know me, son," he said. That's their problem, not mine. I didn't fully understand what he meant. Not yet. 1 week before the wedding, I went to pick Claire up from her parents' house. I let myself in the side door. She'd given me a key months ago, and I heard voices from the kitchen. The door was half open. I wasn't trying to listen. But voices carry. Patricia's. You could still call this off. Ryan Harrington is a better match. You know that. A pause. Claire. Mom, the wedding is in a week. Patricia. Exactly. There's still time. I stood in the hallway for a few seconds. Then I walked back out the side door and sat in my car. Here's what I knew about the Harringtons. Old Columbus money. Commercial real estate. Exactly the kind of family Patricia had been engineering toward for years. I'd heard the name once or twice in passing. A son, named Ryan, who'd gone to Dartmouth and now ran part of his father's firm. I'd never thought much about it. I sat in that car for 20 minutes. I went through all of it. What I'd heard, what it meant, what I was going to do with it. And then I made the worst decision of that entire year. I went back in, knocked on the door, and pretended I hadn't arrived yet. I want to be honest about why I did that. I wasn't afraid of a fight. I stayed because I needed to know if Claire was in on it, or if she was just trying to manage her mother. I thought I could find out at the wedding. I thought I would see, in the moment that mattered, which way she'd fall. I gave her the benefit of the doubt for 1 more week. I should have known then. Some answers don't need a test. The rehearsal dinner was at a restaurant in Upper Arlington. White walls, low lighting, the kind of place where the menu doesn't have prices because the people who eat there don't ask. Patricia had chosen it. She mentioned, twice in the first 20 minutes and once more after the appetizers, that she and Gerald were covering the cost. My parents arrived on time. My dad had on his good suit, the gray one, double-breasted, the one he kept in a dry cleaning bag in the back of the closet. He looked fine. More than fine, actually. He looked like a man who didn't need to dress for anyone, but had taken the trouble anyway. Gerald met them near the door. He looked at my dad, nodded once, and shook Donna's hand. Not Howard's. He just nodded. My mom noticed. I saw her eyes go to her husband's face, checking. My dad's expression didn't change. Midway through the dinner, Patricia stood to say a few words. She thanked the venue, thanked the guests, said lovely things about Claire. Then she turned slightly in the direction of my parents' end of the table and said, with a warm smile that was doing a lot of work, "And we're so glad Miles's family could join us. Howard, it's wonderful that you could make it, like he'd traveled from somewhere difficult, like his presence required acknowledgement the way a generous donation might." Under the table, my mom felt my hand. She held it for a second. I didn't look at her. My dad picked up his fork and kept eating. Before I go any further, if you've ever sat at a table and felt like someone you love was being talked around instead of talked to, I want to hear about it. Drop it in the comments below. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. This story has a long way left to go, and you don't want to miss what's coming. Patricia, at the end of the night, pulled me aside near the coat check. She looked up at me with an expression of practiced concern. "I just want to make sure tomorrow goes smoothly for everyone," she said. "Your father might feel a little out of his depth with the kind of guests we're having. Just manage it if you can." I looked at her for a moment. "My father has never embarrassed anyone in his life," I said. She smiled. "Of course." I didn't sleep that night. I lay on top of the covers in my hotel room and stared at the ceiling and tried to figure out if I was doing the right thing. Not the wedding specifically, but all of it. The way I'd let things go on so long. The way I kept drawing lines in my head and moving them forward every time someone got close. At 1 a.m, I called my dad. He picked up on the second ring. "Still up?" he said. Not surprised, just checking. "Yeah," I said. We didn't talk about anything important for a few minutes. He asked if the hotel room was comfortable. I said it was fine. Then I asked him the thing I'd been carrying all day. "Are you okay? With all of it?" A pause. I could hear the television on low in his room down the hall. Some nature program, something about water. "I'm fine, son," he said. They're not kind to you." "No," he said. They're not. And that doesn't bother you. It wasn't quite a question. He heard it anyway. People show you who they are, he said. I've seen enough of that to know it doesn't need to bother me. I didn't have anything to say to that. Before he hung up, he said something I've turned over many times since. Whatever happens tomorrow, you don't owe anyone your dignity. Remember that. I told him good night. I lay there another hour in the dark, running his words back. He'd said, whatever happens, not whatever they say, not however it goes. Like he'd already mapped something out. But I told myself it was just a father being a father. I was wrong about that too. My dad and I had the same room, a suite the hotel had set aside for the groom's family. He was already up when I came out of the bedroom, standing in front of the bathroom mirror, tying his cravat. Rented suit, white shirt, the same shine shoes from the bridal shower. He looked completely at ease. His hands weren't shaking. His face had the same expression it always had, open, unhurried, like he was waiting for something he already knew was coming. You doing okay, Dad? I asked. Always, he said. He glanced at me in the mirror while he straightened the knot. You love her? He asked. Yes. Then do what you need to do today, not what anyone else needs. I didn't know what to do with that sentence. I just nodded. My phone buzzed. Derek Calloway. Just so you know, Patricia wants your dad seated in the back. Less visible, her words. Thought you should know. I read it twice. Derek had sent it in that particular way some people do, not to help you, but to watch what you do with it, to be part of whatever happened next, without any of the responsibility. I put my phone in my jacket pocket without answering. My dad was at the window then, looking out at the parking lot. He reached into the inside pocket of his vest and took something out. A plain white envelope, legal size, slightly worn at the corners. He looked at it for a moment, not long. Then he folded it once and put it back. Ready? He asked. Yeah, I said. We went downstairs. I never asked about the envelope. I wish I had asked sooner. The grand ballroom at the Renaissance Columbus could hold 500 people, and that day it held exactly that. White chairs in long rows, floral arrangements taller than I was, a string quartet playing near the entrance. The kind of room that makes everything feel formal even before anything happens. I found out where they'd seated my parents when I walked in with the wedding party. Row 8, left side, partially behind a marble column. From that angle, you could see the altar, but no one looking from the altar could easily see you. The Callaways were in row 1. I stood at the altar, and I looked at that column, and something went flat inside me. Not rage, something quieter. The kind of feeling that comes when you've been telling yourself a story about a person, and then you see, clearly, that the story was never true. The ceremony started, the quartet played, Claire walked in on Gerald's arm looking beautiful, and I kept my face exactly where it needed to be. During the ring exchange, Gerald leaned to Patricia and said something. Quietly, but not quietly enough. 2 women in row 2 glanced at each other. I caught one word. Worker. Patricia smiled. Then, I saw it again. That man from the bridal shower. Tom Rafter, I'd find out later, though I didn't have a name for him yet. He was at a table near the front with a group of Gerald's business associates. He looked at my father. Really looked. The way you look at someone you're trying to place. He took out his phone. He held it for a second like he was deciding something. Then he put it away again. He'd made his decision. I just didn't know yet what it was. The reception started the way these things do. The room filling with noise, glasses going up, the band shifting from ceremony music to something with a little more air in it. 500 people talking all at once creates a kind of pressure in a room. It pushes against your chest. My parents found their table. I watched my dad hold my mom's chair. She sat down. He smoothed his jacket and sat beside her. 2 people at a table of strangers, perfectly contained. Patricia went first. She stood at the microphone near the head table and spoke for about 6 minutes. She talked about the Calloway family, its history in Columbus, its values, what Claire meant to them. She was good at this. Her voice had weight, People listened. She did not mention my parents. Not once. Howard and Donna Werner, the groom's parents, did not exist inside Patricia's 6 minutes. Gerald followed with something shorter. He said Miles was a hard worker. He said the family was glad to welcome him. He said hard worker the way some men say it, not as praise, but as categorization, the way you describe something useful that doesn't require much further thought. There was polite applause. I stood up to take the mic, to say something simple, to thank people and move through it. Patricia didn't step back. "Oh, we're not done yet," she said, still holding the microphone. Her smile hadn't changed. She was looking at someone near the back of the room, and I followed her gaze. She was looking at the table where my father was sitting. I'd seen that smile before, in the kitchen doorway, at the rehearsal dinner. She wore it when she'd already decided something, and was arriving at the moment she'd planned. I stood very still. The band stopped playing. Maybe someone signaled them, or maybe they just felt the change in the room. Either way, the music cut, and the silence that came in behind it had weight. Patricia turned slightly toward my father's table. She held the microphone, naturally, the way someone holds a thing they've been holding for years. "I want to say something about the Werner family," she began. Her voice was warm, considered, the voice of someone giving a toast at a charity event. "Miles comes from modest beginnings, and his father, Howard, I'm sure he did his very best." She paused, let it land. Then she turned to the woman beside her, one of her friends from their country club, someone I'd met twice and never quite caught the name of, and said, still in the microphone, voice unchanged, "That's not a father. That's just trash that showed up." A few people laughed, short sounds, like reflexes. A larger section of the room went quiet, the specific quiet of 500 people deciding what to do with something they've just heard. I turned to Claire. She was looking down at the table, and then, as if she felt my eyes, she glanced up. Our eyes met for half a second, and at the corner of her mouth there was a small, involuntary thing. Just a flicker, a smile. She looked away from me immediately. I looked at my father. He hadn't moved. His hands were flat on the table. His face was... I don't have a word for it that isn't too small. He looked like a man who had already decided, long before this moment, that other people's cruelty was not something that required a response. My mother had a cloth napkin against her mouth. I pushed my chair back and stood up. 500 people watched me cross the floor. No one said anything. The room had that held breath quality, where everyone can feel something happening, and no one knows yet which direction it will fall. I walked to Patricia. She was still holding the microphone. I reached out, and she handed it to me. Not because she wanted to, but because the momentum of the moment made it the only thing that made sense to do. I turned and faced the room. "I want to thank everyone for coming today," I said. "I mean that." A pause, long enough that it had its own shape. "But I'm not going to stand here and watch my father be spoken about that way. Not in front of 500 people. Not anywhere." I turned to Claire. She was gripping the edge of the table. "I asked you once, if they ever cross that line, what would you do? You said you'd handle it." "Miles, don't." "You smiled, Claire." She didn't answer. "This wedding is over." I set the microphone down on the table beside me. Not dropped, not thrown. Set down, the way you put something away when you're done with it. Then I did the hardest thing in the room. I said nothing more. No explanation, no argument, no attempt to make Patricia understand, because Patricia was never going to understand, and I was done spending myself on that. Someone near the back said something in a low voice. A chair scraped. One of the bridesmaids made a small, sharp sound. I was not angry. I was clear. Those are different things. That difference took me years to learn, and it turned out to matter more than anything else that happened in that room. Gerald came out of his seat. "You can't do this," he pointed at me, index finger extended, the gesture of a man who has made a career of telling rooms what to do. "Do you have any idea what this—" "Sit down," I said. Quiet. Even. He didn't sit down. Patricia stepped forward. Her composure was still there, barely. Miles, you're embarrassing yourself. Sit down and we'll talk about this. There's nothing to talk about. I turned. My father was standing. He'd gotten up without any fuss. No dramatic push of the chair, no announcement. He was just standing, jacket straight, face calm. Donna had a hand on his arm. I looked at him across the room. He looked back at me. Let's go, Dad. He held my gaze for a moment. Then he nodded. Once. Simply. The way he nodded when a thing was decided and didn't need more discussion. And he came around the table. He walked past Patricia without looking at her, not with contempt. There just wasn't anything there that required his attention. We moved toward the exit. Donna followed, clutching her small purse, napkin still in her other hand. 500 people watched us leave. The room was starting to find its noise again. Chairs turning, voices low and urgent, people leaning toward each other. In the middle of it all, Patricia Calloway stood near the head table with a microphone she no longer had and a room she no longer controlled, and I didn't look back at her. Near the front, at a table with Gerald's business associates, Tom Rafter got to his feet. He watched my father walk past. Then he reached into his pocket and took out his phone. The hallway outside the ballroom was carpeted and quiet, the sounds of the reception muffled behind the closed double doors. We stood near the elevator bank, my dad, my mom, me, waiting in the particular silence of people who have just walked out of something and haven't yet decided what comes next. My mom was the first to speak. She said my name. Just my name. I know, I said. The elevator button was still lit. I watched the number above the doors count down. Excuse me. The voice came from behind us. Quick steps on carpet. We turned. The man from the ballroom, the one who'd been watching my father. He was breathing slightly fast, like he'd come out in a hurry. Howard Werner? My dad turned, looked at the man for a half second the way he looked at everything, taking it in without reaction. Tom, he said. They knew each other. Tom Rafter stopped a few feet away. He glanced at me, then back to my dad. I'm sorry to come out here like this. I didn't want to say anything in there, but I've been on your fund's advisory board for 4 years. I didn't realize you were... He paused. I didn't know your son was getting married. I didn't put it together until tonight. My dad said, This is my son. Tom turned to me. He put out his hand. Tom Rafter. I run Bridgewater Growth Fund. Your father is our largest silent partner. We're talking north of $300 million in assets under his advisory. I shook his hand. I'm not sure what my face was doing. What? I said. My father was watching me. There are things I never needed you to know, son, he said. Until now. We moved down the hall, away from the elevator, to a seating area near a window. My mother sat, my dad stood. Tom Rafter excused himself after a moment. He had my father's number and said he'd be in touch. And then it was the three of us. My dad told me the whole thing. He'd started the logistics company in 1994, 2 years before I was born. Built it from a leased warehouse and 1 truck. For 25 years he ran it quietly. No press, no profile, no industry awards on the wall. He didn't want any of that. In 2019, he sold to a private equity group for a number he said, plainly, once, because I was his son and I had a right to know. $1.4 billion. He didn't change anything after that. Not the house, not the car, not the newspaper. I wanted you to have a real life, he said. Not a gilded one. I wanted to know that you'd make decisions based on who you are, not what I have. I sat with that for a moment. Why didn't you ever? Because the answer was always going to be the same. You didn't need it to be who you are. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket, the envelope I'd seen him hold that morning. He set it on the cushion beside me. That's a transfer of assets I had prepared last month. A portion in your name. It was meant to be a wedding gift. I didn't open it. I just looked at him. He said, You walked out of that room for me. That's worth more than anything in that envelope. Behind us, through the ballroom doors, I could hear the low roar of 500 voices, starting to understand what had just happened. Tom Rafter went back into the ballroom. He wasn't trying to cause anything. He had a client at one of the tables, and he wasn't the kind of man who made a scene. But he also wasn't the kind of man who kept something like this to himself when the right person asked. The right person asked within 5 minutes. Business people in the same room tend to know each other or know of each other, and the name Howard Werner, if you knew where to look, was attached to a 2019 transaction that had made the trade press. Within 15 minutes of Tom going back through those doors, 2 people had searched the name on their phones. Within 20, the information was moving from table to table in the quiet, purposeful way that important information moves among people who understand what it means. Gerald's phone buzzed. He looked at it. A message from someone who'd been at the same table as Tom. 6 words. Did you know who his dad is? Gerald stared at his screen. He searched the name. The first result was a piece from a logistics industry newsletter. 2019. Werner Logistics Group sold for $1.4 billion in landmark private equity acquisition. He turned to Patricia. He showed her the screen without saying anything. She took the phone, read it, looked up, put the phone down on the table. Around her, the room was still making noise. People at other tables piecing it together, leaning in. The particular electric hum of a crowd that has realized the story they've been watching is not the story they thought it was. Patricia Calloway sat perfectly still. Her hands were on the table. Both of them were trembling slightly. Derek saw it from 2 seats away. He looked at the screen. He said quietly, "Mom." She didn't answer him. Claire found me in the hallway about 30 minutes later. My parents had gone upstairs. I was still sitting in the seating area by the window, jacket off, looking at nothing in particular. She'd been crying. Her mascara was intact. Whatever she'd had done for the wedding held. But her eyes were red, and she'd been worrying at the sleeve of her dress. She sat down across from me. "I didn't know she was going to say that," she said. "I believe you." She looked up. "I didn't arrange it. That wasn't something I planned." "Claire?" I kept my voice even. "You smiled." "I was nervous. It was a reflex. I know." And I did know. I'd thought about it in the 40 minutes since it happened, and I knew what kind of smile it was. Not cruel, not deliberate. Just the smile of someone who was relieved a pressure had finally been released, even if the release was ugly. That was the part I couldn't get past. "I asked you months ago," I said. "I told you exactly what I needed. You looked me in the eye, and you promised me you'd handle it. And when the moment came, you looked at the table and smiled." She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "My mother had arrangements with the Harrington family. I wasn't going to go through with it, but she kept, I know about that too." She went still. "I heard you 2 talking," I said. "A week ago, in the kitchen." The hallway was quiet around us. Far away through walls, the muffled sound of a wedding winding down in a way no one had planned. "I don't think you're a bad person," I said. "I think you're someone who will always choose your family when it counts. And I can't build a life with someone who looks at my father the way yours do." She didn't argue. That, more than anything, told me what I needed to know. "Take care of yourself, Claire." I picked up my jacket and walked to the elevator. My dad's phone rang at 9:17 that evening. He looked at the screen, then set it face up on the hotel room's small desk so I could see who was calling. Patricia Calloway. He let it ring twice. Then he picked up. "Mr. Werner." Her voice was different, slower. The warmth that usually coated everything she said had been stripped out of it, and what was underneath was just a woman who had done the math and arrived at a number she didn't like. "I think there may have been a misunderstanding today." "There's no misunderstanding, Patricia," my dad said. Calm, not cold, just finished. "You said what you meant. If I had known who..." "That's exactly the problem." He ended the call. He set the phone down on the desk, looked at it for a moment. Then he went to the window and stood with his hands in his pockets, looking out at the Columbus skyline, the office buildings lit up in the dark. I was sitting on the edge of one of the beds, still in my dress shirt. I watched him. He wasn't savoring it. There was nothing in his posture that looked like satisfaction. He just stood there like a man who had said what needed to be said, and had no interest in saying anything further. After a while, he turned around. "You okay?" he asked. "Getting there," I said. He nodded. He found the television remote and turned it on, and flipped until he found a program about deep-sea fishing. He sat down in the chair by the window. We didn't talk much after that. We just sat in the room together, the television on low, the city outside going about its business. That was enough. In the weeks that followed, things happened to the Calloway family that I only pieced together later. Gerald had a commercial real estate deal pending with the Bridgewater Growth Fund, a mixed-use development on the east side of Columbus, $2.3 million in financing. He'd been moving it toward close for about 4 months. After the wedding, the emails stopped getting answered. Not refused, not denied, just no response. Gerald's contact at the fund had been promoted. The new person was very polite and very unavailable. The deal went into a review process that had no stated timeline. Patricia sat on the advisory board of a local charitable foundation, one of the ones involved in arts funding, the kind where your name in the program meant something. She was asked, without much explanation, to step down from the board that fall. The organization's largest anonymous donor had quietly expressed concerns about the direction of the advisory structure. No one told Patricia who the donor was. Jarek lost a client, a referral he'd had for 2 years. A family that had bought and sold property through him reliably suddenly shifted to another agent. He didn't find out why. None of them ever knew for certain whether any of this had anything to do with my father. That's the thing about Howard Werner. He didn't operate in ways that announced themselves. Things just moved, in the way that rivers move, because of what's upstream, not because of anything visible on the surface. What I know is this. My father did not plan any of it. He didn't set out to ruin anyone. He was just a man who existed in certain spaces, and those spaces had weight. Sometimes that's enough. 3 weeks after the wedding that didn't happen, I called the firm in Portland. The position was still open. The hiring manager said he'd been hoping I'd circle back. I said I was interested. He said they could have an offer out by end of week. I thanked him and hung up. I drove out to Dayton that weekend and told my parents over dinner. My mom made pot roast, which she only made for occasions she felt needed anchoring. My dad listened to the whole thing and then said, "You should have taken it 2 years ago." I laughed. First time I'd laughed in 3 weeks. It felt like something slowly coming back online. After dinner, I sat at the kitchen table while my mom washed dishes and my dad read the paper. Same table I'd grown up at. Same kitchen. The window over the sink still had the same curtain from when I was 12. I watched my dad's hands on the newspaper. Big hands. The kind that look like they've done actual work, even though the work he'd done for most of his life happened in meeting rooms and conference calls. He'd built something real, and he'd never felt the need to tell anyone about it. Not me, not the neighbors, not the people at the bridal shower who looked at his rented suit and decided they knew what he was. I thought about that for a long time. Before we get to what happened next, I want to ask you something real. Have you ever had to choose between the person you were building a life with and the person who raised you? Because I stood at that exact crossroads, and I didn't always know which way I'd fall. Tell me in the comments. And if you've been here through this whole story, thank you. I mean it. I moved to Portland in November. I took one bag and the envelope my father had given me, which I still hadn't opened. Portland in winter is gray and wet and surprisingly easy to disappear into. I like that about it. I needed some time where nobody knew the story. I found an apartment in the Pearl District, small, good light in the mornings, within walking distance of the office. I bought a coffee maker and put it on the counter and got back to work. My new job was harder than the old one, which turned out to be exactly what I needed. My dad flew out in February. He told me he was coming. He didn't ask. He just said he'd be there on the 14th, and asked if the airport was easy to get to from where I lived. I said it was fine. He said good. He showed up in the same kind of clothes he always wore. Flannel jacket, good boots. He looked at my apartment, nodded slightly, and said, Nice light. We walked along the waterfront that afternoon, south toward the bridges. It was cold and clear, and the river had that particular flat color it gets in winter. We walked mostly in silence, the comfortable kind, the kind that's been earned. At some point I asked him the thing I'd been carrying since October. Why didn't you ever tell me? Any of it? He walked a few more steps before he answered. He didn't seem to be finding the words, just giving the answer its proper amount of space. Because I wanted to see who you'd become without it. And? I asked. He looked at me. I'm proud of you, he said. 3 words. He said them simply and without ceremony, the way he did everything. I didn't answer him. I didn't need to. We kept walking. The river moved beside us. The city went about its business overhead. There's something I've thought about a lot in the months since. Not the dramatic parts, not the ballroom, not Patricia's face, not the quiet phone call to Portland. Something smaller. The curtain on the kitchen window in Dayton. My parents never replaced it. Same curtain I'd stared at as a kid while I ate breakfast. Faded a little at the top, where the sun hit it. My dad could have bought 10,000 kitchen curtains. He could have replaced the car, the house, the furniture. He had the means to do it twice over, and never thought about it once. He wasn't performing modesty. He wasn't hiding from anything. He had simply, at some point, decided that the life he wanted to live didn't require any of that, and he'd lived it, completely, without looking over his shoulder to see if anyone approved. I think about what I got wrong in those 2 years with Claire. Not loving her? That was real, and it doesn't embarrass me. The mistake was staying past the point where the information was clear. I kept offering her the benefit of the doubt because I wanted the story to turn out a certain way. That's a thing I did, and I own it. What I didn't get wrong was the table in that ballroom. I didn't get wrong the moment I stood up and said what I said. I've been told my whole life, without quite hearing it, that there are things you don't trade away. Not for comfort, not for convenience, not to keep the peace at a table full of people who have already decided what you're worth. The man who taught me that was sitting in row 8 behind a marble column in a suit he'd rented and shoes he'd shined himself. He was the most valuable person in the room. He always had been. People ask me sometimes if I regret how it happened, the timing, the room, the 500 people. I don't. Not because of what I found out about my father afterward. Not because of the envelope or Tom Rafter or whatever quietly happened to Gerald's deal in the months that followed. Those things are part of the story, but they're not the reason. The reason is simpler. My father was standing 10 feet away from me when someone called him trash in a microphone. And the only question in that moment was, what kind of man am I? I gave the answer I could live with. Everything else followed from that. I opened the envelope in my Portland apartment sometime in March. I won't tell you the number. But I sat with it for a while, and then I folded it back up and put it on the desk, and I went and made coffee, and I stood at my window and watched the street below. My dad called that evening. He asked if I'd opened it yet. I said I had. He asked what I thought. I said it was a lot to take in. He said it's yours to do what you want with. And then he talked about a fishing program he'd watched the night before. That's Howard Werner. That's who he is. I don't know what happened to Claire. I heard secondhand that the Harrington arrangement never materialized. I wish her well. I mean that sincerely. As for me, I have a good job, a small apartment with good light, and a father I call every few days who still reads a physical newspaper. That's the whole story. Have you ever had to choose dignity over comfort? Or watch someone you love be dismissed by people who had no idea who they were dealing with? Tell me in the comments. I read all of them, every single one. And if this story stayed with you, share it. Someone out there needs to hear it today. If you made it to the end, thank you. Seriously. It means something that you stayed through all of it. If you want more stories like this one, I've put together a playlist in the description. Every one of them hits just as hard, and they're worth your time. Go check it out. And if you're sitting with something right now, a family situation, a relationship that's asking more from you than it should, drop it in the comments. You don't have to figure it out alone. Hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.